Chapter 1. One Pip sits by his parents' grave in the graveyard near the marshes crying that it was Christmas Eve, but he is an orphan. 2. Magwitch the convict appears with leg irons and asks for food to let Pip live. 3. Mrs. Joe is angry. Pip would have been in the graveyard long ago if she hadn't looked after him, but she is not happy to do. 4. Early the next morning, Pip takes nuts, fruit, the cold meat pie, and the file to the convict, but he runs into the other convict. 5. Pip feels guilty but doesn't tell Joe, as Joe might not want to be his friend. 6. A group of soldiers ask for a blacksmith to fix the handcuffs that the convict has broken to escape. 7. Joe, Pip, and Wopsle follow the soldiers, and they hope they don't find the convicts. Chapter 2. When the soldiers find the two convicts fighting, Pip shakes his head to the convict. The convict admits stealing the food from Joe's house. 2. In the evening, Pip goes to the village school. An old lady and her granddaughter, Biddy, teach Pip to read and write. 3. By the fire, Joe says his father didn't let him go to school, but had a good heart. He says Mrs. Joe is a fine woman. He'd rather she hit him instead of Pip. 4. Mrs. Joe says that Miss Havisham wants Pip to go to her house. She's a rich lady in the nearest town who never left her house. She wants him to play with Estella. 5. The house looked unused. Most of the doors were closed. It was dark everywhere. Miss Havisham stayed in the dressing room lit by candles with all curtains closed. She wore her old wedding dress with a veil on her face and dead flowers on her hair. All clocks were stopped at 20 to 9, 8:40. 6. She asks Estella to play with Pip and break his heart. Estella says Pip is a poor common boy with dirty hands and ugly boots. She puts his food on the ground and smiles to see him cry. 7. Pip tells only Joe what happened, saying he is ashamed of his position in life. He decides to learn as much as he can. He hopes to leave the simple life and become a gentleman. 8. Returning home from school, Pip meets Joe in the inn. Joe was with a man who looked and talked strangely and was holding the file. He gives Pip a coin wrapped in a banknote. Chapter 3. 1. Miss Havisham's relatives visit her, Sarah, Georgiana, Camilla, and Raymond Pocket, to see her, ask about her health, and wish her a happy birthday. Pip meets Mr. Jaggers and Herbert Pocket there. 2. Pip waits in the dining room, a dark room with a table with plates and a wedding cake. They were covered with dust and spiders' webs. 3. Miss Havisham gives Joe a large bag of money to pay for Pip's apprenticeship. 4. In the blacksmith's, Pip asks for an afternoon's holiday to visit Miss Havisham, but Orlick, Joe's workman, argued with Mrs. Joe and is angry with her. Chapter 4.1. Miss Havisham says Estella went away for education to become a lady. Pip and Wopsle meet Orlick on the way home. Orlick says some convicts escaped and he behaves strangely. Mrs. Joe is hit on the head. She is unable to speak or walk. There are a convict's leg irons on the floor. 2. Pip tells Biddy he wants to be a gentleman to appeal to Estella. Biddy says Pip shouldn't care what Estella thinks and she isn't worth his effort. 3. At the village inn, Pip, Joe, and Wopsle meet Mr. Jaggers and take him to the workshop. He says Pip will receive a large amount of property in the future, but he must have an education. The only condition, he shouldn't ask about his secret benefactor. Pip buys fine clothes and puts them on at Mr. Pumblechook's house. Chapter 5.1. Pip thanks Miss Havisham for his fortune, and she lets him think she is his benefactor. For Pip, he will be taught by her relative, Matthew Pocket, and Jaggers is her lawyer. 2. In London, Pip sees Wemmick, Jaggers' clerk. Jaggers tells him he will go for his lodgings at Barnard's Inn and share rooms with Herbert Pocket. Matthew Pocket, his teacher, lives in Hammersmith. 3. Herbert tells Pip his story. Estella is Miss Havisham's adopted daughter, and she is proud and cruel. Miss Havisham uses her to take revenge on men. She and her half-brother, Arthur, inherited a fortune. He spent his share and became jealous of her. She was engaged to a man, Compeyson, her fiancé. Matthew Pocket warned her against him, but she got angry with Matthew and asked him to leave, so he never visited her again. Her fiancé deserted her on the day of wedding 25 years ago. He and her brother planned to take her money, and her fiancé had been married. 4. In Hammersmith, Pip meets Startop, good-natured, and Bentley Drummle, proud, out and grumpy. Mr. Wemmick says all criminals are afraid of Jaggers. Chapter 6. In Jagger's house, Pip has dinner with Startop, Herbert, and Bentley Drummle. Drummle boasts about his strength, so they boast about their skills. Pip complains to Jaggers, and he tells Pip to stay away from Drummle. 2. Molly is Jagger's housekeeper, Estella's mother. She's tall and thin, a woman of 40 with scars on her wrists. 3. Pip receives a letter from Biddy. Joe will visit him tomorrow at 9. Pip feels ashamed of Joe and his common behavior. Joe says Miss Havisham wants to see Pip and Estella has come home. 4. On the coach to the village, Pip hears 2 convicts speak. One of them was the man who gave him the coin in the inn. The convict said the coin was from Magwitch, and Magwitch got a life sentence for his escape. Chapter 7-1. Pip is shocked because Orlick is Miss Havisham's gatekeeper. Pip warns Jaggers against Orlick, and Jaggers promises to dismiss Orlick. 2. Estella thinks Pip changed into a fine gentleman who needs better people than the village people. Pip decides not to see Joe again. He doesn't talk to the village people, and only sends Joe a present. 3. Miss Havisham reminds Pip of Estella's rudeness. Estella agrees and tells Pip that she has no heart and she isn't kind or good. 4. Mr. Jaggers doesn't look at Estella at dinner, but she looks at him often. 5. Herbert advises Pip to forget Estella because she will make him unhappy. 6. Estella is going to Richmond to a wealthy lady who was paid to introduce Estella to suitable people. Pip will accompany her. 7. Estella says Matthew Pocket is better than the other Pockets. His relatives are jealous of Pip. They talk badly about Pip, but Miss Havisham never discusses Pip. 8. They go past Newgate Prison. Estella says that Mr. Jaggers knows a lot about every place. She has known him for most of her life, but she doesn't know much about him. She wants to know more about him. 9. Estella reminds Pip of someone walking in Miss Havisham's house on her arrival in London on the way to Richmond. Chapter 8-1. Pip feels guilty as he changed for the worst. He didn't visit Joe, and he is extravagant. He also encourages Herbert to be extravagant too, so Herbert is deeply in debt. They join the Finches, an expensive gentleman's club. 2. Estella and Miss Havisham have a terrible argument. Miss Havisham complains to Pip that Estella is a hard woman with a cold heart. Estella says Miss Havisham made her like that. Estella had admirers in London, especially Drummle. Pip is jealous, but Estella says she tricks all her admirers apart from, except for Pip. 3. On Pip's 21st birthday, Jaggers gives him £500 from his benefactor, but doesn't tell Pip about his benefactor. 4. Pip wants to help Herbert, so he paid Mr. Clarriker to give Herbert a job. 5. Magwitch visits and tells Pip he was his secret benefactor. He was given a life sentence in Australia after the escape. Because Pip had brought him the food and the file, he worked hard to make Pip a fine gentleman. He is in danger in London because if the police find him in London, he would be arrested for his life sentence. 6. Pip is horrified because his benefactor is a criminal and he cannot take more money from him. 7. Mrs. Joe dies. Pip attends the funeral. He knows from Biddy that Orlick was frightening her. He is still angry that Mrs. Joe's attacker hasn't been caught. He promises to make Orlick leave the village. He promises to visit Biddy and Joe often, but they don't believe him. Chapter 9-1. Magwitch Provis is in danger. The police might arrest him, and Compeyson is chasing him in London. 2. Magwitch tells Herbert about his past. As a child, he begged and stole to eat. He went to prison many times. He sometimes worked and learnt to read and write. He got married and got a friend called Compeyson. He was a dishonest man. He and Arthur tricked a wealthy woman and had a lot of money, but they spent it all. Magwitch stole and supported Compeyson. They were arrested, and in court, Compeyson said Magwitch was responsible for all the crimes. He looked rich, so the court gave Magwitch a longer sentence. Then they escaped from the prison ship and were fighting on the marshes when the police found them. Magwitch was sent to Australia for a life sentence. Then, Compeyson was chasing Provis in London to kill him. Chapter 10-1. Pip blames Miss Havisham for misleading him and letting him think she was his benefactor. He was tricked because she was kind to him. Apprenticeship. He says she also misled Matthew and Herbert, who treated him well for her. To thank them, Pip asks her to help Herbert with her money while Pip is away with Provis. 2. Estella says she will marry Drummle. Jaggers says Drummle isn't intelligent and their marriage will be unhappy. 3. Jaggers tells Pip about Molly's past. She was a homeless criminal who married a convict and had a daughter. Then, she was accused of killing 2 people, her child and another woman. She was acquitted thanks to Jaggers and became his housewife. 4. Miss Havisham feels sorry and sad because she used Estella to break Pip's heart. She asks Pip to forgive her. 5. In Newgate Prison, someone told Wemmick that Provis, Pip, and Herbert were being watched by Compeyson. Wemmick sent a message to Pip telling him not to go home, so he slept in a hotel. Wemmick also warned Herbert, so Herbert took Provis to Mr. and Mrs. Wimple House by the river. 6. Pip is a good planner. He buys a boat and practices rowing every day. 7. In the theater in London, Wopsle, an actor, says someone was watching Pip during the play. He looked like one of the 2 convicts on the marshes. Chapter 11:1. Miss Havisham tells Pip about Estella's past. She told Jaggers she wanted a girl. He brought her Estella, saying she was an orphan. 2. A spark of fire burnt her wedding dress. Pip saves her, putting the fire with his coat, the tablecloth, and his hands. He burnt his hands. When her relatives and the doctor arrive, he leaves. She was crying and saying, "Forgive me." 3. Herbert washed and bandaged Pip's hands, speaking to Pip to comfort him. 4. Herbert knows from Provis that he married a woman and had a daughter. His daughter disappeared, then his wife. She was accused of murdering her child and an older woman, so Provis didn't go to the court. 4. Jaggers tells Pip that Molly had hid the child before she left Provis, so people thought she killed her daughter. 5. A letter from Wemmick asked Pip to help Provis escape. Another letter without a name asked Pip to go to the old house on the marshes to get more information about Provis. It was Orlick, and he tied up Pip to kill him. 6. Orlick did that because Pip spoiled his life. He made Orlick lose his job at Miss Havisham's. He told Biddy not to trust Orlick. 7. Orlick adds that he attacked Mrs. Joe as he was jealous and angry. 8. Herbert found Orlick's letter, so he brought Startop and a group of men from the village and saved Pip. Orlick escaped. Chapter 12. 1. Pip and Herbert and Startop take Provis on the boat. They wanted to go on to a steamer to Hamburg. Compeyson and the police appear on another boat, asking Abel Magwitch to go with them. 2. Provis attacks Compeyson. The steamer passes close to the boats. There was a large wave, and Pip's boat started to sink. 3. Pip, Herbert, and Startop are rescued. Compeyson was missing. Provis was hit on the head by the steamer. 4. Pip visits Provis every day in the prison hospital, and Provis gets a life sentence with other 32 criminals. 5. Provis is dying, and Pip tells him his daughter is still alive and he loves her. 6. Pip becomes very ill. He has strange dreams and hears strange voices. Joe looks after him for weeks and pays his debts before leaving. He tells Pip Miss Havisham died and left most of her money to Estella, leaving some money to Matthew Pocket, as Pip asked her to help him. 7. Orlick goes to prison for breaking into Uncle Pumblechook's house to rob him. 8. Pip goes to the village to thank Joe and to ask Biddy to forgive and marry him. She says she married Joe. 9. Pip works for Mr. Clarriker in Egypt. He and Herbert become managers in Clarriker's business. 10. After 11 years, Pip visits Joe and Biddy. They had 2 children. Joe named the boy after Pip. 11. Pip meets Estella. Drummle had been cruel to him and she left him. Then, Drummle died in an accident with a horse. 12. Estella sold the land of Miss Havisham's house, asks Pip to forgive her and to stay friends. Pip thinks they will never be apart again.